Welcome to Lemonade Learning, a refreshing look at learning today. We serve up high-impact practical strategies alongside honest and energizing stories to help educators.
Make the most of your moments, lead and learn with purpose, and craft lifetime lemonade from the sweets and sours of education. Join us for a glass.
Hey everybody, it's Bree.
And Lainey, welcome. Ooh, Bree, tell us about our guest today. I'm excited.
So, I get really excited when my people from Texas get to, when we get to share some amazingness that's happening. And so I am super jacked about having Dr. Jill Seiler on our show today. And what could I say? I mean, there's so many things that we could say about Jill. She is the superintendent of Gunter ISD. She's not originally from Texas, but those of us that are from Texas, we like to say she got here as fast as she could. So no harm, no foul about not being from here. She's been here long enough that she's granted citizenship. And so we'll definitely give her with that. She serves as the chair of the Future Ready Superintendent Leadership Network Design Team, which is something that is unique to Texas. She also shares a national role with us from Future Ready School. And so there's a couple of different, it gets a little bit confusing for people outside of Texas, but all of that to say, she keeps a pulse on what is happening for schools across the nation, especially leading in that superintendency role. And I'm super grateful for that. I would also be remiss if we didn't talk about the fact that she published an incredible book, Thrive Through the Five. And we're going to talk about it. I'm sure we're going to unpack a little bit of it. So many incredible nuggets that are in there. And I just cannot wait to hear what all you're going to add to our conversation. So thank you, ma'am, for joining us today.
Thank you. It's so great to be with you, Bree and Lainey. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, I'm feeling a little bit like the odd man out, as you two have all of the connections. You're both in Texas, you're both future ready, and you're both I like to say I'm future ready. I mean, you're both actually affiliated with Future Ready, and you both keynoted FETC. So I feel like feeling a little out. But it's okay. It's okay. I feel like after the conversation, we're all going to be like sisters and it's going to be all good. So thanks for being here, Jill.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, okay. So we always start with sweet and sour because we feel like this cuts right to like, where are you at right now? And so we're recording a little bit ahead of time, but for where we are right in this moment, what's going on with you?
So I'll start with my sweet, which is the fact that I did write this book, Thrive Through the Five. And, the book is about leading through really challenging times. And it's kind of the running joke because I wrote the book a full year before the pandemic started. And honestly, like even then, like that whole notion of I love my job 95% of the time, which is incredible. But there's this small portion, this 5% that is really, really challenging. But the funny part is, or maybe not as funny, is that in this past year, man, has there ever been a season that has been more needed for this message? And it has been a really, really challenging year. So the sweet part has been writing that book and sharing it, especially in a time such as this. The sour part has just been the challenges of leading through this year. And the piece that I want to just focus on, which I think will really resonate regardless of your listeners, if they're teachers or leaders, is just that the waves just keep on coming, right? So 1 year ago, we're recording this like March 17th, but 1 year ago, we just found out, that the coronavirus was coming. And so as a leader, we're making all those decisions about closure and opening. Are we going to close or are we going to open? And then realizing that we were going to have to transition to remote learning, it was that how do you transition an entire system to remote learning overnight? And we got through that. And then the summer came and we realized that some of our kids were going to come back. In Texas, a lot of our kids did come back. And so all of that great work that we did around remote learning, we kind of realized, hey, we can't do that and ask those same people to teach full time for all of their kids. So how do we do that? And then just working through our opening procedures. And then you finally get that through that. And then our Texas governor made the decision about lifting our mask mandate. And again, school leaders were left with this decision of what do you do? And of course, that's very contentious. And so the sour has just been, you finally feel like you're at a place where you're like, okay, we're up, we're doing this. It's not easy, but we're doing this. And then the next time you turn around, man, there's just another huge challenge in front of you. And that's been what's been so difficult about this past year.
I feel that. I mean, I'm sure Bree's with me. This resonates with us. It's like as soon as you start to get your bearings, you find your footing, and it's like that rug just gets pulled right out from underneath you. And I'd love to hear what Bree has. I do have a question, but Bree, what are your initial thoughts?
No, I mean, I completely, I completely identify, empathize, and resonate with what all you just shared, because I do think that, again, whether you're in the classroom, whether you're in leadership, whether you're a parent, whether you're a student, the continual changes are, they're happening across. And I've been having a lot of conversations with people in a variety of industries, whether they're at higher ed or they're in, PK-12 or they're in, corporate, whatever it looks like, how this change, how the past 13 months have really impacted what normalcy means and looks like, and and what that, where that's going to take us. And I do think it's so, I love that you shared, we moved from the spring response to then the summer plan to then the August pivot to then the fall changes, and then now we're back into kind of this, what this is that time of year, this is March, this is when we start looking at the next school year and the planning and where all that's going to come in. And I remember this time last year, and even into April and into May, where we were planning for fall, and it's like, where do we plan? What does that look like, right? Because I do think that education is that really kind of persnickety kind of industry where we really like to have solid answers, but yet we understand that it's such a fluid circumstance, right? Like we have a plan that we have enacted for equity, that we have enacted for, making sure that it can be really compartmentalized and created across the board and scalable. But at the same time, we have to make it agile enough to where it can be, really applied and implemented for each individual. And whoa, what a heavy burden and to shoulder all of that. And so, I'm curious, and I hope that we'll kind of unpack this as we go through it, because I'm really curious. A lot of us have talked about the good things that have come from the past 13 months, and then what that looks like moving forward, right? Like we're all looking forward to that day when, we're no longer feeling distanced or that mandated distance. But at the same time, there's been a lot of really good things that have come from that. And so I'm really curious about putting the genie back in the bottle in a lot of ways. And we don't want to, we don't want to remove some of those barriers. So that's kind of what's going on in my brain. And like I said, we'll have plenty of time to pull all these elements out, I think.
Yeah. Well, and you just talked about just the changes, and, one positive that I can just say off the bat, our state commissioner of education started immediately with these daily phone calls, and those were so helpful. But as last year, as we were starting to make those plans, you're just waiting for information. And I remember talking to another superintendent in Texas, Doug Williams from Sunnyvale, who's fantastic. And I asked him, I said, when do you really think we're going to know? Like, when do you really think we're going to have a solid idea of what the fall looks like? And he just deadpanned, responded back and said August 1st. And I was like, there's no way. And sure enough, it was like late July, August before we really knew what was going to happen. And, Lainey mentioned that we had the opportunity to speak at FETC. And one of the videos that I shared in my keynote was by Adley. And it was a super funny press conference. It's called Press Conference that she did. And it was like last April, March, April. And it was when just the pandemic was starting and we were getting all this conflicting information. And her little parody is just, like everything is closed except for the things that are open. And, you can't do this except you can do this. And it was just super funny. And I still share that now because the point you made is so, things continue to change. And we were at our board meeting and one of our board members said, hey, I don't know if you saw, but the CDC changed the amount of distance in the schools from 6 feet to 3 feet. Like, we're a year into it and it is still in this constant cycle of change. And I think that's been challenging.
Yeah. So I have a question because I'm going to just cling on to this because I know this is something that our work has in common. So I'm trying to feel included, and I know you guys have the sisterhood. So you talk about, I've heard you talk in the past about keeping your focus, right? Like you can't do everything. You do have to have a focus. And that's something that I think is really important and has also never been harder than this past year. And so I wonder, what has been your focus and how have you been able to keep that through this very challenging time?
Yeah. So that is one of the most important lessons of leadership, is that it's not about what you want to do or what you think should be done. It's about having the self-awareness to recognize the situation and then act accordingly. Right. And so we, prior to this pandemic, were in the midst of like strategic planning and doing all this kind of work. And it doesn't mean that you stop that work altogether, but it certainly does mean that you reprioritize and refocus. This was not the year to roll out huge initiatives on X, Y, and Z that weren't necessarily related to the crisis that we were facing. And so I think that is important. For me, this summer I had the great opportunity to interview Daniel Pink. He wrote the book Drive and recently the book When, and had a great conversation with him and asked him, a whole bunch of things. But at the end of the interview, I asked him this question of, given everything that you've read, everyone that you've interviewed, and in this moment, social unrest, in the midst of a pandemic, so much uncertainty, changing information, conflicting information, how would you suggest that we lead? And his first thing out of his mouth was just that the premium of care has to be on the people. And so I think that's first and foremost, like when you're talking about focusing, especially during a time like this, it has to be on the people in your organization, the teachers in our classrooms, our bus drivers, our cafeteria line workers, all of that, and our students. And the challenging thing about this crisis is to meet all of their needs. It has been conflicting in nature, right? Like I have my kids' academic needs, and I know what it looks like to meet their needs in the best way, right? We've done great work remotely, but we also know that, man, when you have them in person and you're able to do such incredible things in the classroom, that is awesome. But we also have the physical health of everyone in our organization, and then kids' social and emotional needs, and how to meet those is all conflicting. And so that's been difficult. But my focus this year has been on that. It's been on how to care for our people and how to ensure that we're still teaching and learning, and how to keep everyone safe in the process. And that has been my entire year's work.
Yep. And that's a focus we want to keep, right? I'm
Right.
starting, I don't know if either of you are feeling this way, but I'm starting to have some new anxiety, although that's probably, we're all getting new anxiety every week, it seems like, but this new anxiety about, okay, if we do transition back and it's really, no more masks, no more social distancing, like, are we going to lose some of the things that were gained this year? The focusing on social emotional learning, the focusing on the just wellness of a child, not just academically, but social emotional as well. So I don't know. That's for me. That's a little bit of an anxiety I have. I'm watching. I'm optimistic, but I just want to make sure we're super intentional and keep that focus.
Well, I'll tell you this, that our transition to remote learning, like many others, last spring was incredibly challenging. Like we had islands of excellence when it came to just degree of just comfortability and, savviness with technology. But certainly that was not easy for us. And we layered professional development. We totally reimagined what that would look like and came up, with a good plan to meet our kids' needs. And so our teachers, although I would not have wished this pandemic on anyone, right? Just like what Bree was talking about, the good things that did happen, like, wow, did we grow from a technology standpoint? And I too was worried, but Texas has kind of had a little head run with this because we have had kids come back. And I'll tell you, when we brought our kids back, we had an option for remote learning. So I had a portion that was at home and a portion that was at school. And because our technology devices hadn't come in yet, we found ourselves without technology in school, right? The kids who needed it had it and they were at home. And then because of that, all of our Chrome carts and things that we would normally share were depleted and we were going one-to-one, but of course no one could get anything in because everyone in the world was ordering it. And I'll tell you, between that and then the Texas freeze that we just had, which was so cold and we lost power and internet, we're still just building back our internet infrastructure, which is a whole other story. But between those two events, it is crystallized how much our staff has changed in their use of technology. And so, like, whereas it was just something we would add in, it is now, man, like it is it's a stable part of what we do. It's a main part of what we do. And so that's so encouraging to me. Not that we've had major troubles with our technology infrastructure, but we are now one-to-one, and it has changed how we teach kids, and that has been great.
Yeah.
You're making my implementation heart so happy. I remember, I was really fortunate to be able to help steward a district from no technology to one-to-one, and I remember so very clearly the frustrations and the pain. I mean, the true pain that came along with how am I going to change, how I'm teaching and all of these different pieces, and then moving from that to, even just 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months later, those same teachers being like, I cannot imagine not having this in my world, right? Like, it's one of those pieces where, and I think that so much of that comes from how you implement, how you leverage this, right? Like if your focus becomes, and again, I think that's one of the wonderful things that came from the pandemic. Again, not to overshadow the terrible things that came from it, but at the same time, like some of the really strong bright lights that came are if we focus on the instructional purposes of technology, not just using technology for technology's sake, but how it actually improves and changes that learning opportunity. That's where teachers and students alike understand the benefit of it and the reason for it, right? And I think that because we've got kind of thrown from the from the frying pan into the fire, like we had to figure it out really fast. And there was no time and no error for all of the, the typical bright lights and distractions that happen in that way. Instead, it was like, okay, we need to get this information to our kids. How are we going to do that? Oh, here's this technology piece that's going to help us because we can't get it to them in any other fashion. And it's really wonderful to see how that answers the questions for teachers, and that answers the questions for students of why do we have to do it this way?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned something that's really interesting, Jill, because you're talking about how you've already gotten to see kind of how that transition back is happening, because there are certain parts of the country that are more in person than other parts of the country. It's not even just states, because I can tell you in Southern California, we have pockets of in person. In Northern California, that's kind of unheard of unless you're in the really rural parts. And so it's just been kind of interesting to watch as people transition back. And I kind of keep thinking about this long view of like, where do we want to be once we get to a point where we're not getting the rug pulled out from under us on a pretty regular basis? Like, where do we want to be? And that super intentional, here's what technology can do really, really well. And here's what the human beings, the highly skilled professionals can do really, really well. And how do we get to, because I think for some, it might be almost overwhelming at points to, I work for Orange County Department of Ed. They're my biggest client. And I was working with the team and we were trying to give suggestions for how districts could do summer school now that some of them will have more in-person opportunities. And it was a little bit overwhelming to me, because I was like, well, wait, when we start lifting the constraints, now it's almost like, that paradox of like too many options. And so, and that's where I keep coming back to focus, because I feel like in the midst of the crisis, there was a lot of people jumping onto as many tech tools as they could, which terrifies me because I don't think that's the answer. I think we need to pick with very good intention, we need to focus on the ones that will accomplish exactly what we need to do. So I guess what I'm just hoping for is just this long view of like, what do we want it to look like in 2 to 3 to 5 years? Have you had a chance to think about what your hope is kind of on the other side of this? I know you talked about it a little bit, but was there anything else you're thinking of like really far down the road?
Yeah. Well, and some of the work that our district has been focused on, innovative learning is the first part of our strategic plan. And we really went to George Kouros's work around the innovator's mindset in terms of what to look for in today's classrooms, things like voice choice, taking risk, self-reflection, all of those pieces. And so I would hope that, technology has really opened the doors in terms of just kind of personalizing education and giving some of that choice and ability for students to share voice on so many different just modes of being able to do that. That would be my hope down the road, is that because we have grown so much in our capacity with technology and understanding how we can really connect with students, that we would take those very best pieces and bring those back into the classroom. And that's what I've been really encouraged by as I've seen my own teachers come back. I mean, I'm going to be honest, like we talk about like, reimagining education and all of that. As someone who has come back face to face, this was not about reimagining education. This was about making sure that teachers felt comfortable and students felt comfortable, and that we had safety protocols in place, and that we were learning. Like, I'm going to be honest, like that was the bar. And our teachers have done incredible things, but like I've said, you know, it's very challenging to ask teachers to do this remote learning that is incredible, but very time consuming. And then also teach kids, the very same people doing the very same thing, which for the majority of school districts that are smaller, which is the mass majority across our country, that's what we're asking them to do. And so I think as leaders, we want to, on one hand, be that vision casting, what do we want this to look like? But on the other hand, be very grounded into what we're asking our educators to do and support them and help them grow. But at the same point, be very realistic about the true challenges that they're facing. And so it's just a very complex piece that we've had to work through as leaders.
I think you articulated that really, really well. I love that, because you do have to have the eye on, like, this is what is going to happen now. And we don't want to be putting on people things that just can't even happen still. We're still not there yet. But then also just thinking ahead of, like, this is the vision. I love that. What do you think, Bree?
Mm-hmm. So I kind of want to ask a follow-up question with this, because I think that one of the pieces that is really important is, you know, you were talking about strategic planning, and we know that part of strategic planning is that it's not limited to 1 year and it's not limited to one time, right? So it's this looking at this long view, and then how do we break it into short elements, and you know, so that we can have these mini goals and then keep things moving and have it, you know, kind of spider web and move out into all of these elements, yet at the same time limit the overwhelm that comes with this, right? Like, so we talk about this all the time in education, that we have this like massive buffet of items that are out there. There's a lot of different ways that this can be done and that it can be achieved. And kind of coming back into Lainey's question around focus, you've talked about that from your standpoint. And I think that it's also, I'll speak for me personally, the 95% of things that I absolutely love about about leadership, but then also the 5% that just really kind of stink at it, really truly often that 5% comes when focus isn't clear. Like when I don't have the clarity, when I don't have the emphasis or the initiative that needs to happen in order to make sure all of this comes in, then that part can like really beat you down, right? And so the phrase that comes to mind that I really cling to is that you can be anything, but you don't have to be everything, right? Like, so there's all these choices and you can pick what is best. There's anything that you can do, but you don't have to have every single component of it in order to succeed and in order to do that. So when you're looking at this with your strategic plan and then you're rolling this out through your leadership team at the school district and to your campuses and all of that, how are you helping maintain that focus? Because, you know, Lainey and I do a lot of work with districts, with teachers, as well as with leadership teams of like, how do we mitigate overwhelm? And, you know, if we're struggling with it as leaders, like then that comes, you know, sometimes even magnified at that teacher level, because then they're trying to figure out how to implement all of that. So how are you mitigating that for your teachers, for your staff, and really helping them understand that, you know, these aren't isolated incidents, that they actually are, you know, can be kind of folded into your strategic plan, and they're going to be things. This isn't just our pandemic protocol. This is, you know, these are things that are going to, you know, these pedagogical practices are things that you can continue to do for 3 and 5 and so years.
Yeah. Well, and I think just as a teacher myself and being in systems where there was just initiative fatigue, right? So every year was a different deal, and it was, you know, PD one day on this and something different the next, like that left a mark on me. And then in being in systems where it was more sustained, that year after year, you were going deeper in different aspects, and there was much more connectivity. So seeing that as an educator, I've, you know, really been hopeful to emulate that as well. And so for us, it has been, you know, just what I talked about earlier in terms of having focus. First of all, recognizing when the time is to move forward with all sorts of things and when it's not. And so case in point, when we shifted to spring remote learning, you know, there's a lot of different ways that we could go about it. And kind of that old model of professional development was, okay, we're going to have a professional development day. And we learned really quickly, like, that's not going to happen. And nor can we teach everything to everyone. And so it was being really strategic about, okay, what are the specific tools that our teachers need to know right now? And so, and then layering those, so like day one, like make a YouTube video or set up your YouTube channel, and day two, learn how to screencast and upload it to YouTube. And day three, Google Classroom, this specific piece. And so it really changed our narrative around that. Most importantly, it has been just being mindful of what is appropriate to move forward with. And so, like I said, this year, we really took a step back in terms of like pushing any sort of new initiative, because we knew that we're in the middle of a crisis. It's not necessarily appropriate, but also try to continue that vision and that focus with the things that we were doing. And so, as much as I kind of like beat myself up over like, man, we're not, doing exactly what I thought we should be doing. When I look at where we are right now compared to where we were a year ago, we have made huge strides towards that. And so I think like just the things that you talked about in terms of having a singular focus, connecting the work to each other, like those are the pieces that are most important. It's important to vision cast, but it's not about the piece of paper, right? Strategic planning is not about the plan in the end. It's about the conversations that happen with teachers and leaders and community members and students and staff around the table to talk about what is it that we want for our district and how can we best achieve it. That right there is where the magic happens. And as a leader, the ways that I can support that with singular focus that's not going to overwhelm people is that sweet spot that I want to get to.
I love that you said that it's not that you're trying to introduce a new initiative. It's also that you are trying to reinforce things that have been part of the past. Like, I think that is so important. And I know that that's one of those things that often happens. We get stuck in this mentality of like something new every year, like, oh, here's the new piece, here's the new piece, here's the new piece, that we end up not firmly connecting the dots between years of like, this is where we were, and you talked about going deeper and really delving into that. You have these entry points, right? Like, I mean, even if you just look at it from a curriculum focus, right? We don't necessarily do a super great job of firmly connecting the dots. And one of the pieces that I see that happens a lot with, from a leadership perspective, is that we just dive into that surface, right? So we kind of skitter across it. And then here's the new piece that comes in, and here's the new piece that comes in. And we, on the leadership team, we're very intentional about how it connects, but the people who are implementing it aren't involved in all of those conversations. So they might not completely see the connections that we find so obvious unless we make a point on that. So I love that you are showing that, that we want to continue to spiral that, just like from a curriculum perspective, we do this, we introduce it in 6th grade, but we're still talking about the same piece in the 9th grade and in the 12th grade. It's just at a different, deeper level. You talked about reading, George Couros' book. When I first read that, I wrote like all over the margins, innovation is not the same as invention. And I think that we so often forget that. We think it has to be brand new. It's never been thought of before. And that's not the case. And I love that you, like, that would be peaceful for me to be a part of that district and hear you explain that connectivity and that interconnectedness that happens with the strategic plans. So on behalf of your teachers, thank you for that.
Yeah,
and I think it's important.
I know. I think everyone who listens to Jill is like, I want to work with Jill. Like, she's amazing. Like
You're super kind.
She gets it. She understands where we are. She knows where we should go. She's taking care of people as the humans that they are and keeping that focus. So I love that.
We're excited to have Nick Day Creative Design as our branding partner for Lemonade Learning.
Nick Day has helped us refresh our brand identity, giving a delicious new twist.
Jill, will you tell us, Bree, can we ask her about the book? Because I kind of want to hear a little bit about
I was going to say, can we shift to the book? Like, yeah, let's do that, because we've talked about some of the 95% of things that like we love. So let's talk about this. Like, I have a feeling that you didn't sit out to be like, whoa, this is a celebration of those 95% of the things that we love. You wrote the book of like, holy cow, this is the 5 that I'm so. Talk to us about this. How did this come to you? And so I've heard, because I have not written a book, but I've heard that we write the book that we need, right? So I'm guessing that was kind of where you were. So tell us about it.
It was. By the way, I just want to say really quickly, Bree has written enough to write a book, as it put it all into a bound thing that you get on Amazon. But
talk to me afterwards. I'll walk you through how to do it. I'm just kidding. Yeah. So, I always start, talks that I give with this quote by Mark Anthony, which is just that, people say that if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And countering that, like, I absolutely love what I do and I've never worked harder. Right. And so I love what I do and I love a large majority of it. 95 might be a stretch, especially after this past year, but I love so much of it. But there is this small part that is so incredibly difficult. And it's not just, everyone knows that, right? It's part of our work, part of our lives, no matter what you do, home, family, personal, we all have things that we love and things that we don't. I think though, especially when it comes to leadership, but really any profession, that part that we struggle with, that is such a challenge for us, that we don't talk about it enough. And I found for myself, like my go-to is I just try to get through that moment. Like I just try to survive. Like, my mantra was this too shall pass, right? Which is the funny joke because we're like 12 months into this pandemic. It is not past, friends, right? And so I just got tired of trying to survive and I wanted to do more than that. I wanted to thrive. And so I had really never thought of that, Bree, that we write the books that we need. And I think you're right, because I definitely needed this. And so I talk about in the book, kind of three main sections. One are just contributing factors, like things that we grapple with in and out that really we struggle with. And so getting really honest about failure and fear and dealing with high pressure. And if there are like two things that have really resonated with people in my book, it's probably the failure and the fear part. And I think this past year, going through COVID, where we've had to redo everything from scratch, how you're teaching remotely or how we do car line or cafeteria or how we do choir. Everything we've had to rethink and redo. And when you have to start from scratch, there's always that element of failure. And so we're constantly butted up against that. And so how do we respond to that? And how do we push through that? And how do we make that help us be better teachers, leaders? And that is really resonated with people. And then just talking about fear, that, when I look at my own leadership journey, that has been the main thing that has held me back. And I say that as a sitting superintendent, still struggling with fear about what's coming next. And so, I just have been really vulnerable and open, because I've found that when people have been vulnerable with me and have shared their struggles, it empowers me to say, hey, I'm not the only one. And if she got through it, I can get through it too. And I think especially as women, that's something that we kind of second guess ourselves. And so we don't talk about it a lot, but I found that it is really freeing when you share with people, like, this is, thinking about moving into the superintendency. I didn't think that I was ready. I didn't think that I would want to move from where I was at in terms of where we live. I didn't think that I would like the job. I didn't think that I could balance being a mom and a superintendent. There was just so much fear, but nothing changed from me having those fears and me becoming a successful superintendent, except that I stepped out and did it. Yeah. And so that has been just something I think that has really resonated with readers.
Yeah. So I would say that I have a rule for myself, and Bree has really helped me with this, because I specifically remember December of 2019, Bree and I are in San Diego. She's future ready faculty. I'm just there to connect with people. She's telling me and I think, Jill, I've even heard you use this reference about in a job requirements. It's like the man mm-hmm. Thinks he only needs to know about half of it. I'm going to butcher the numbers here, but the woman thinks I need 100% or 90% or something like that. And when Bree told me that, I was like, oh, that's so me. That's so me. So one thing that's really, I loved you talking about the vulnerability. One thing that has been a real driver for me is that I get opportunities because of the consulting work that I do. And so my rule to myself is I'm not allowed to say no to something just because I'm afraid to do it. And so I can say no because it doesn't align with what needs to happen with my family, or I can say no because it doesn't align with what I believe as an educator, but I can't say no just because I'm afraid of it. And so that fear is just something that just weighs you down. That really resonated with me. And so I appreciate you sharing that.
And how about not saying no to something before it even presents itself as an opportunity? I've already talked myself out of it before it even comes to me. So I so hear you with that. I talk in the book a lot. I have a love-hate relationship with public speaking, which is ironic because it's literally part of my job. And certainly
you're very good at it.
Part of this other piece, right? And there is an element, right? like I can connect in that way. But I mean, just all out. If you've ever read Dare to Lead by Brene Brown, she starts off the book talking about like her almost panic attack before she spoke in front of this session. I was like, oh, thank God I'm not alone, you know. But just as I was getting my feet under me about speaking in front, you know, in front of people, audiences, of course, COVID hits and everything goes virtual. And I started getting opportunities to speak, and I was just petrified. Like, how do I, like, it's hard enough to speak in front of a live audience of 1,000 people that are laughing with you, hopefully not at you. And then to talk to a dead computer screen with zero interaction. And of course, it's gotten much better now with like live chats and all those sorts of things. And I remember at the same time, George Couros, again, he had just keynoted at one of my districts in Austin that I lived in Leander ISD, and he had gotten such rave reviews. And so I just shot him an email and I said, I would love to talk with you. And he spent an hour with me. And of course, he's done a full course now on how to connect through presentations, and it's exceptional. But he just walked me through just some of the ways to connect virtually. He's like, I've done this for 6 months. Here's what I found is really effective. And that helps so much. But I think, you know, Lainey, what you're talking about, like, I'm not going to say no to something just because I'm afraid of it. Like, I shut myself down. And so I've really tried to work hard to say, okay, I'm not going to say no, but let's find out who is killing it in this area and let me go talk with them. And that's what I did in that particular circumstance. And oh man, has my virtual speaking gotten so much better because of that.
We were just sharing earlier about how incredible you are. I mean, FETC, I was like, holy moly, you crush it. And I think it's just, it's so, I love the vulnerability that you share in that. And I think that it's also one of those pieces, you know, we talk about don't be afraid of failure and, you know, leaning into failure. And we say all of this from an educational perspective. But then it's one thing when you were saying it, right? And it's another thing when we're actually living in it, and certainly empathize. You know, I find myself in this all the time as a leader. Like, I constantly am second guessing myself in all of those pieces that come into it. But then I also, this actually even as recently as this past weekend, I find myself in that position where it's not necessarily my peers and my colleagues, but it's learning from my own children and learning from the kids, and how intimidating and overwhelming that can be, right? And so I certainly empathize with our teachers out there whenever they're finding themselves with someone who has always been, or, you know, has typically been in that position of knowing their stuff, right? Like, this is, you know, you're standing in front of your class and you're that authority. And now all of a sudden you find yourself putting information out there that you don't feel as good and comfortable about. And so I'll share a really quick story. Lainey, you know, doesn't necessarily, although she's getting to know Texas pretty well, but she she finds herself in awe of the fact that I have a little farm and have livestock and horses and all of this. And so this past weekend, I was at a horse show with my son, and my son is an incredibly gifted rider, and he's really, really, really amazing at what he does. And it's been a day or two since I've ridden. And so I'll just go ahead and say that, like, it has been almost as long since I've ridden competitively as I rode competitively. So we can do the math on that. And let's just go ahead and say it's been about like 20 something years. And so I found myself in this circumstance where I'm also riding one of my son's horses that he has ridden competitively, that he has won, you know, a lot of awards on. And now all of a sudden I'm riding her and I'm not doing nearly as well as he is. Right. And like, it's one of those things where it puts you in your place. And now I'm finding myself like asking my 12-year-old son for advice, asking him to like, and I have to learn how to like, it's hard enough to be vulnerable to do that. And then it's hard. And then on top of that, then you add in the like being gracious about it. Right. And it's so hard to not be like, how, you know, what all it takes. And so I think there's so much in what you just shared over the fear and the failure, because it's not just, I'm afraid of what could happen. It's also the, like, I'm afraid of who I become in those situations and what other people will think of me if I don't have my scene under control, or if I'm asking for help in this way. Like, we put so much pressure on ourselves, especially as women. Again, like, I'm a woman, so I know I have a bias on that, but I think there's so much that's in there. So thank you for writing the book that we all need at this point.
Absolutely.
And I do think the vulnerability piece is, I know we got to start to wrap up here, so I want to give you a moment for final thoughts if you want to share anything else, Jill. But I think the vulnerability piece is really touching a lot of people, and it took COVID for people to feel like they could be more vulnerable. I know it did for me. Brie, I don't know if I can speak for you, but I would not have done a podcast if it wasn't for COVID. So I think we're all finding a way to step out of our comfort zone, but it doesn't always make it easier, but it's been a little bit easier for me during COVID. And I think that the vulnerability piece, watching celebrities cooking it, like Brie, you give the example of cooking shows, dimly lit kitchens that people are doing with their phones and all this stuff. It's kind of given us a permission to use a term I've heard from Tom Murray, fail forward. And so I love that.
Well, and I think it's not even just the fail forward. Like, I mean, you really hit on it, like things that we've been really successful at in the past that now all of a sudden, because we have different constraints, because we have different circumstances, we're not as good as we used to be. And like that pressure right there is so hard. Like you were sharing, Jill, like you just gotten used to like handling that on the stage and dealing with, you know, the interactions of all these people. And then all of a sudden, now we got a little change of circumstance. And it's like, oh, that vulnerability of like, I'm not nearly as good as I used to be. And what are people like? It is that rug that's pulled out from underneath you. And, you know, I mean, you have kids as well. Like that's for Lainey and I, that was the same thing where it's like, we're really good at telling other people how to do this. And then all of a sudden we have children of our own at home and we're trying to navigate this. And that circumstance is different. Like it's different from doing that in a classroom with kids to then being in your own home and handling things. And I would imagine for you as a superintendent, it's also different as a mom of kids who are dealing with all of that. And so I think just that continual, going back to what you said at the very beginning, like the continual waves of change that are all in there.
One of the quotes that I share, you know, when I speak often is just that we need to understand that feeling of being overwhelmed and even inadequate is just part of the growing process and not a sign that we're not the person for the job, that like we're not doing a good job. And I think for all of us, teachers and leaders, this year has been a year of being overwhelmed with everything we've been asked to do and to try to tackle, and inadequate because we've had to just be completely outside of our comfort zone. But we have to remember that is a sign that we are growing, not a sign that we are a failure at what we're doing. And I think that's important for people to hear.
I love that.
I think we just may have found our title, A Sign to Grow, Not a Sign to Know. I love that. I love that. Like, I think what a powerful reminder that it's not how well we do it. It's that perseverance and that resiliency to keep going.
Oh my gosh, Jill, I think we could talk to you forever, but we have to respect your time. And so we'll start to wind down here. What is the best way? I mean, I hope people check out Thrive Through the 5 because you're amazing. And I think you make us all feel better. And so we need to have you close all the time. And a book would be a great way to do that. What are some other ways to connect with you? Social media, things like that.
Yeah. So on social media, I am at Jill M. Seiler everywhere. And my website is jillmseiler.com. And I would love to connect with your listeners.
Oh, Jill M. Seiler across the web. I love that. That's very nice. That's very nice. We're going to have a frame around the for the people who are watching so they can see that as well. But we'll have it in the show notes for people who are listening. And we want to get people connected with you. And thank you so much for your time. This has been an honor.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Wonderful. Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks everyone for listening. And oh yeah, that was a lot of shouts out to George Couros. I feel like we need the soundboard so we could do the air horn like he was. This is like the one time I was like, oh, we really need that. But all right. Thanks everyone for listening.
If you enjoyed this batch of Lemonade Learning, please check out our website, lemonadelearning.us, for more resources. Be sure to subscribe today so you don't miss out on future lessons, laughter, or lemonade.
And if you're feeling really generous, please go to Apple Podcasts to submit a review so other educators know the value. One last thing, Learning and Lemonade are best together. So please connect with us on social media using the hashtag Lemonade Learning to share your story. Plus, we're always looking to give away stickers and swag.